America's most elite soldiers versus the premier shock and awe troops of the ancient world. Special operators capable of infiltrating their targets via land, air, and sea versus horse-born masters of steppe warfare that spread the Mongol Empire from Asia to Europe to create the second largest empire in history. Modern firepower and elite training versus the Great Khan's most feared warriors. Who would win a showdown between a team of Navy SEALs and a Mongol Horde? Navy SEALs come packing a whole lot of modern firepower, with each team punching well above its weight, even against conventional infantry units. But today they're going up against a group of warriors for whom war was a way of life. If you were born a Mongol during the early Middle Ages, then there wasn't much to do but kick ass and chew bubblegum, and since bubblegum hadn't been invented yet, that left only one option. War was just a tradition for the Mongols. It was the only way a Mongol leader proved his legitimacy to his followers. It was also how the Mongols fueled their economy, seizing spoils of war from their enemies to enrich themselves. When Genghis Khan entered the chat, though, he kicked things up to 11 and began to organize the desperate Mongol tribes into a unified horde that had one purpose: invade literally everything. Genghis would organize the tribes into tribal units expected to provide him with 1,000 soldiers each when called upon. With 98 of these Ming Han under his service, the Great Khan could rally a massive army when the need called for it. Later, the empire would raise troops from among the locals they conquered, creating the largest professional army in the ancient world. But just because they were a horde doesn't mean they were savages. Genghis initiated some pretty progressive reforms in the territories he took over, including establishing a meritocracy, where people were promoted according to their ability and skill, rather than tribal seniority as had been the case. To keep morale high, all sea spoils of war were shared equally, with a dedicated group known as the Jarku overseeing the distribution of everything from horses to slaves and food. Commanders would receive booty, land, and/or tribute from conquered nations, while ordinary soldiers received direct compensation for their enlistment, with any Mongol from age 14 to 60 being able to enlist and fight. Genghis instilled great discipline amongst his troops, making any comparison to barbarian hordes wholly disingenuous. However, where Genghis was far ahead of his time was in one specific leadership doctrine shared by modern Navy SEALs and the rest of the U.S. military: personal initiative. At the time, it was the norm for armies to operate with a heavy top-down command structure, with orders being rigidly enforced and subordinates compelled to follow them without compromising, at least if they didn't want to risk their job or even their lives. However, Genghis recognized something that even the modern Russian army has yet to. The battlefield is fluid, and to best respond to it, lower echelon commanders needed the flexibility to adjust to changing conditions. Thus, he instilled a great sense of personal initiative in his horde, empowering lower-ranking leaders to take the initiative and be proactive with their commands. Modern SEALs, like the rest of the U.S. military, also have a deep sense of personal initiative instilled in them during training. This is because of the same realization the Mongols came to nearly 1,000 years ago. Lower-ranking leaders could better and faster respond to an evolving situation than senior command, which could take anywhere from minutes to hours to realize battlefield conditions had changed. But that level of initiative isn't easy to achieve, as it requires great trust in the quality of your training and military education delivered to both soldiers and leaders up and down the chain of command. It requires a very specific culture, and the difficulty in attaining it is best summarized in the remarks of a Chinese general to his American counterpart when observing a recent U.S. exercise, with the Chinese general impressed at the personal initiative of junior leadership in combat conditions and stating that Chinese military culture is, quote, at least 5 generations behind. SEALs need to have personal initiative and the ability to adapt for an additional reason, though. Where they go, they often go alone. While a rank-and-file U.S. infantry unit could have other units nearby to call for support, or everything from air and naval artillery support, SEALs specialize in direct action and special reconnaissance deep behind enemy lines. They may not have the option to call for help from anyone, and thus need to be flexible enough to adjust their plans on the fly. When it comes to training, Mongols were basically the Navy SEALs of their time. It all began during childhood. From the moment a Mongol was strong enough to pick up a spear, and it didn't matter if they were a boy or a girl, the Khans of the day ran a very egalitarian society. If you were good at putting the pointy end of a stick inside other people, Mongols didn't much care for your gender. Thus, many Mongol women turned into some of history's most fearsome warriors. Once a Mongol child was able to, they would start competing in everything from wrestling to foot races. Hunting and archery were critical skills for a Mongol child to learn, as well as horse riding, skills that would make the Mongols one of the most successful armies in history. Mongol warriors were renowned for their accuracy with bows and their ability to maintain this proficiency on horseback, but could mix it up with a variety of melee weapons as well. Lances with hooks on the ends would be used to pull riders off their horses, where they could be cut down with everything from battle axes to single-edged swords. But it was the bow that made the Mongols the most feared warriors of the era. Mongol warriors utilized composite bows, which could have much as twice the range of other bows used by armies during this time period. If you're a fan of filling your enemy with sharp sticks while not having any sharp sticks fired at you in return, then you can appreciate the advantage of having greater range than the opponent. But Mongols carried two bows. The larger bow would be used for long-range shooting, while the shorter bow was easier to use on horseback and thus was used when the horse riders closed the distance. The use of stirrups and high-backed wooden saddles proved to be a revolutionary adaptation, allowing Mongol warriors to use their bows with great ease and increased accuracy, even while at a gallop. The bows themselves were difficult to draw thanks to them being strung against the natural curve of the bamboo, wood, and horn used to construct them, but this gave them increased range and even greater penetration power. Their arrows were typically tipped with bone, which was plentiful on the steppes, while metal was much more difficult to acquire, making it rarer. However, each soldier carried a variety of arrows suitable for either delivering poison, punching through armor, firing at long range, or creating a shrill whistling sound to signal other units or lower the enemy's morale. US SEALs also carry a variety of equipment, but they don't have a standard loadout. What a SEAL takes to the field depends on the mission, though the assault rifle is standard fare. This can include everything from the universal M4 to the Mk13 CQBR or M14 EBR. Sometimes it's a choice made from personal preference, sometimes it's simply the right tool for the job. If a SEAL team is infiltrating Houthi-controlled territory, as we know is currently happening, it doesn't make sense for them to be carrying M4s made by good old Uncle Sam. Instead, they'd likely carry something more local so they draw less attention. This means SEALs, like any U.S. Special Operations Forces, need to be universal masters of all firearms, meaning they train on every weapon in the U.S. arsenal, as well as most of what's in the Russian and Chinese ones as well. However, a SEAL team sent out to deliver the righteous wrath of Uncle Sam can be loaded to bear with everything from a vehicle-mounted M2 50 caliber machine gun to the machine gun of choice of 9 out of 10 home defense experts, the M240. Because sometimes you need to kill the bad guy in your house and the one in your neighbor's house simultaneously. SEAL marksmen will utilize a variety of sniper rifles to reach out and bring democracy at all ranges of 1,500 plus yards. An Mk12 Mod 1, essentially a modified M16, might be perfect for accurately supporting your buddies in a firefight, while the M82 50 caliber anti-material rifle is the weapon of choice for making unarmored and even moderately armored targets disappear. Under-barrel grenade launchers let SEALs bring the party to multiple opponents in a 15-meter radius all at once, or activate the extended warranty of any lightly armored vehicle. But when SEALs want to send a strongly worded letter of disagreement to the enemy, they do so with either the Javelin anti-tank guided missile or the M136 AT-4 rocket launcher. The Javelin is by now a legend and has recently become an unofficial patron saint of Ukraine, with the distinction of turning thousands of Russian tankers into Russian astronauts. The Javelin can either be fired straight into enemy vehicles or in the preferred top-down attack profile that makes it so good at briefly bolstering the roster of the Russian Air Force with Russian tank crews. In either configuration, it employs a dual-charge warhead that's designed to first slap explosive reactive armor out of the way, so an explosively formed jet of liquid all-American freedom can bore through armor and subject anyone and anything in the way to an extreme emotional event. But as fun as the Javelin is, sometimes you need a lot of people to leave the chat all at once, or maybe the enemy's holed up in a bunker and rudely refusing your invitation to exit. That's where the AT-4 comes into place. Sweden does two things well: chocolate and recoilless rifles. Produced by Saab, the AT-4 is the infantryman's solution to the age-old question of what to do when a small building is in your way. The answer is, of course, make it disappear, and this is where the AT-4's high-explosive dual-purpose 502 round comes into play. The round can be set to detonate either on impact or after a brief delay. The former setting makes it suitable for taking out lightly armored vehicles, while the latter makes it a wizard at leveling buildings. The round will typically punch through the outer wall of the building to say hello to everyone inside, shortly before turning them into atoms and collapsing the entire structure down on them. Because sometimes the quickest path past an obstacle is not to go around or over it, but through it. The AT-4's variety of rounds allows it to take on a wide variety of targets, adding to the flexibility of a SEAL team, which is likely going to have to be completely self-reliant when deep behind enemy lines. When it comes to mobility, Mongol warriors were unrivaled in their day. Each soldier could have as many as 16 horses at their disposal and would rotate horses so as to not exhaust any of them. This allowed them to move with incredible speed, allowing Mongol armies to travel as much as 75 miles in a single day. With such high mobility, the Mongols often enjoyed the benefit of surprise, and they would ensure that they kept that surprise all the way up to the battlefield. While during battle, orders could be relayed via whistling arrows, drums, or gongs, the first attack would always be carried out in complete silence. This could have caused some confusion amongst the defenders, who might have mistaken a charge for simply repositioning. In places like the remote mountains of Afghanistan, SEALs also utilized horses. Also a light, agile force, SEALs are delivered to their targets in everything from nuclear submarines to inflatable rubber rafts and even ordinary bicycles. Currently, the Department of Defense is investing heavily into electric motorbikes to give special operators a silent and agile option while on a mission behind enemy lines. With the ability to penetrate a target with speed and stealth over land, air, and sea, SEALs have the ability to pop up exactly where an enemy expects them the least. This ability to surprise an enemy mirrors that of the Mongol hordes, whose prolific cavalry could speed them along so quickly that an enemy army was often caught unaware and unprepared. When it comes to defense, the Mongols wore a variety of armors. Their light cavalry forces would often wear tunics made of thick quilted felt or leather, trading protection for agility. Even their heavy cavalry, though, was lightly armored in comparison with other forces of the time period. Their armor would consist of similar thick leather tops and pants, but interwoven with either strips of metal or even animal bones. Hardened or lacquered leather was also common and could provide excellent protection against slashing weapons, though it wasn't as strong against a thrusting one. The Mongols didn't produce very much plate armor or chainmail, preferring to dex tank instead, but they would sometimes wear captured pieces of plate and chainmail from the foes they defeated. One thing the Mongols adopted from nations they conquered, specifically the Chinese, was the use of silk undershirts. These silk undergarments weren't just about feeling fancy, but served a crucial battlefield purpose. When struck by an arrow, the silk had the unique property of wrapping itself around the arrowhead, which helped minimize bleeding and protected the wound. It also made the arrow much easier to remove. Silk seems like a strange choice to wear to war, but the Mongols found an excellent use for it thanks to their absorption of Chinese knowledge. This assimilation was commonplace throughout the Mongol Empire, with the Horde readily adopting new weapons, tactics, or techniques from the people they conquered. Given how important horses were to the Mongols, they too could expect to be armored. Plate armor was typically reserved for the horse's head, and usually each animal would enjoy long coverings made with stiffened leather, which was commonly interlaced with bone and metal strips. Mongol horses weren't as large or as strong as those bred in Europe and needed to remain agile anyway due to the Mongols' tactics, so full plate armor was rare for a steed. Along with personal armor, each Mongol warrior would wear a helmet that would either be made of iron or hardened leather. These helmets would sometimes have a neck guard that came down to protect the back of the neck, and a spike or a ball and a plume would often adorn the top of it. Traditional Mongol fur hats with upturned brims were also commonplace. Unlike many Western armies, the Mongols did not make widespread use of the shield. Only infantrymen would carry shields, and they would typically be small and circular, made of wicker or leather. These were made to protect the troops from arrows more so than blows from melee weapons, with Mongol warriors preferring mobility over protection, putting most of their points into dex instead of strength during character creation. Body armor worn by modern SEALs has been evolving since the year 2000, when the US issued the first fully ballistic armor meant to be worn by all combat troops. The Interceptor body armor system would eventually be replaced in 2007 by the improved outer tactical vest, an upgrade over the previous iteration of body armor. The biggest of these changes was the adoption of the enhanced small arms protective insert ballistic plates, which offered far better protection against a large range of ballistic threats. The IOTV system is modular, meaning that it can be scaled up or down depending on the projected threat environment, or a need for mobility and endurance. The core vest with ballistic plates is always worn, but can be supplemented with additional protection. The enhanced side ballistic inserts protect the flanks of a soldier, which are normally unprotected, given that the main armor plates are worn over the chest and back. The deltoid and axillary protector systems offer neck, throat, as well as deltoid protection, and a groin protection extension can be attached for nearly full frontal ballistic protection. Fully kitted up, this can give a soldier excellent protection and acceptable mobility, but it can be cumbersome and sap an individual's endurance very quickly, making it a less than ideal choice for missions requiring a lot of traveling, but excellent for kicking down doors. While still in use, the modular scalable vest system is currently in development and expected to be adopted soon. Though given their status as elite operators, it's likely SEALs have access to fancier protective gear than a rank-and-file grunt. To protect the head, SEALs use an integrated head protection system, which is only now starting to see adoption by the wider force. This helmet is 5% lighter than previous iterations and features improved ballistic protection as well as passive hearing. It also has the benefit of adding an additional 2-pound armor plate for soldiers with a habit of trying to headbutt bullets. Unlike previous helmets, the chin strap is boltless, meaning that there is no bolt hole through which the chin strap is attached to the helmet. This eliminates the traditional ballistic weak spot around the bolt hole area, improving protection on both sides of the helmet. The IHPS also features side rails for mounting everything from communication headsets to flashlights or cameras, and the traditional night vision sight that's standard for US soldiers. When it came to actual fighting, Mongol armies were divided into cavalry units of about 1,000 soldiers, which were further subdivided into smaller units of 100 and then down to units of 10. This created a multi-stepped chain of command, which enhanced their encouragement of personal initiative and made the Mongols very flexible and able to adapt to battlefield conditions. Surprisingly, Mongols made up only a small part of their own army. The bulk of their army would be made up of units from territories they had conquered, which would fight according to their own style. But the pure Mongol force, which spearheaded much of the empire's conquests, were normally made up of around 10,000 Mongols, and surprisingly, this often left them outnumbered by their enemy. However, with superior mobility and speed, they overcame the numbers disadvantage with stunning results, and rather than slaughter the defeated, they were often simply absorbed into the horde. On the attack, Mongols preferred to use deception when possible. A smaller force would go out and engage the enemy, only to feign a withdrawal. Pursuing enemy troops would then be surprised by the main body of the force, who would take advantage of their disarray to overwhelm them. However, when an enemy did not fall for the ruse, the Mongols would utilize a maneuver known as the Talukma, which consisted of an attack by heavy cavalry with light cavalry immediately behind it. The heavy cavalry would smash into the enemy's lines and create holes through which the light cavalry would move and attack at the core of the formation, creating disarray and throwing the enemy's defense off kilter. More cavalry on the wings of the formation would then envelop the enemy on the flanks, sometimes going for a full envelopment, which could be risky but effective. A reserve force would then reinforce any weak points or go after retreating enemies, with pursuit sometimes lasting for days. The Mongols were as clever as they were formidable in battle, and often made use of decoys to confuse or demoralize the enemy. In order to make it seem like their force was larger than it was, they would often lash straw dummies onto the backs of spare horses, giving the illusion that there were far more of their numbers than there really was. These dummies would be carried along even on actual charges, the demoralizing impact of an overwhelming force, sometimes causing enemy lines to break. Masters of deception, they would also light bushfires to create thick smoke screens. These smoke screens would allow them to move their forces around without being seen, confusing the enemy as to where and when the attack might come, or simply as to the total number of forces they were facing. Once, they even tied leaflets to a kite and flew them over the Jin city of Kaifeng, with the leaflets falling down into the city and promising a cash reward for anyone who defected. However, a key tactic in the Mongol conquest was the use of terror as a weapon. In order to avoid prolonged and costly campaigns, the Mongols would sometimes execute the entire population of a city, even including its animals, and then leave a handful of survivors. These survivors would flee across the land, spreading news of the atrocities they witnessed. This caused other cities to surrender on sight of an approaching horde, hoping for mercy, which was often given, and sparing the Mongols the cost in lives and treasure in taking individual cities one by one. Another clever tactic employed in their fight against the Jin Jurchen dynasty of northern China was to repeatedly sack the same city over and over again, but withdraw each time. This forced the Jin to send fresh troops and supplies to deal with the chaos, exhausting them financially. It was their incredible adaptability and ingenuity that made the Mongols so successful, and that same adaptability and ingenuity is baked into the playbook of modern SEALs. Often working as a small force deep behind enemy lines, SEALs need to outsmart and outmaneuver their enemies, and out-of-the-box thinking is strongly encouraged, within the framework of the law of armed conflict. This means modern SEALs won't be marching prisoners out ahead of them to absorb enemy arrows the way the Mongols did. So, who would win in a showdown between a horde of Mongol warriors and modern SEALs? Our SEALs would be facing a Minghan of warriors, over 1,000 of the horde's best cavalrymen. Opposing them would be a full team of US Navy SEALs, and the word team is a bit misleading here. Each team is actually made up of a headquarters element and 8 16-man SEAL platoons, with a total combat force of 128 of the world's most skilled and best-equipped soldiers. Equipped for the fight at hand, each platoon would be split into 2-man squads, with each squad bringing at least one machine gunner to the fight. Each SEAL could also be equipped with the AT-4 recoilless rifle, utilizing high-explosive rounds for use against mass targets. Riflemen equipped with underbarrel grenade launchers can supplement the explosive firepower with up to 18 rounds of 40mm grenades. Things look grim for the Mongols, and indeed they are. 128 men armed with firearms capable of killing at ranges of hundreds of meters, while the Mongols can't begin to launch arrows from their composite bows until reaching 350 meters, and even then with dubious accuracy and penetration power against a fully protected SEAL. Yet the Mongols proved to be incredibly adaptable, and realizing the power of modern weapons employed against them, would immediately disperse their forces so as to limit how many could be killed by a single rocket, grenade, or machine gun strafe. With their incredible speed, the Mongols would pay a heavy price, but could easily get several hundred soldiers into melee range, even if suffering catastrophic casualties in the attempt. Once in melee, many of the SEALs' modern advantages are nullified, and the fight swings firmly in favor of the Mongols. In the end, given their superior numbers and more importantly ability to get in close fast, the Mongols would win the day simply because they were better equipped and trained for hand-to-hand combat. It would be one of the costliest victories the Horde had ever scored, but SEALs are simply not structured to take on large threats. With a lack of heavy weapon elements, a SEAL team would underperform in this scenario in comparison to an equivalent normal US Army or Marine Corps infantry force. In that case, the Mongols would face heavy weapon squads with attached mortar elements and significantly more firepower given the larger size of standard infantry platoons. SEALs are hit-and-run forces, not designed to engage in stand-up fights. For this reason, we're declaring the Mongols the victors today. Though it's likely that being so impressed by their capabilities, the Mongols would simply offer the SEALs the opportunity to join their horde. Now check out China's worst military mistakes in history, or watch this other video instead.